All right, hello everyone. This is day 4 of week 2 lookup week, and today I'm talking about offset. I'm talking about offset and only offset, and we're on a new version, by the way. So another email through, minor typo. I've also added a little bit to the offset tab at the end, so definitely worth downloading version 2.03. Keep those typos coming to me by email or message when you spot them. It just helps make the workbook better. So a whole video dedicated to offset, and I love offset. So I generally follow the FAST standard for my best practice modeling, which there's a whole debate we could have about best practice standards, but most best practice principles are kind of aligned, and then FAST has one or two quite prescriptive principles that are unique. But I have always said I think the principles of FAST are fantastic, and I think the underlying document is a bit of a ongoing messy work in progress and should have been updated years ago, but hey, it is what it is. It also makes bold statements in certain places that I don't agree with. So one of them is don't use offset. I think it says don't use indirect as well. So I take that principle that FAST tells me I should follow, and I say no thanks, because I like offset. You've got to be careful how you use it, and it's a volatile function which adds another layer of risk potentially to the workbooks that you build, but it's very, very powerful. So please spend the time going through this offset tab in the workbook. But let me also just talk you through it, because I think in battle situations in particular, where you've got to get to an answer quickly and maybe just worry less about how other people find, following your logic, how easy it is, then it's a great option to use. So offset allows you to essentially move from a starting position to other positions, and also to expand the range of that final position so that you're looking at more than one cell. So what do I mean by that? Well, you've got a starting position as the first part of the syntax, and then you can literally move it columns and rows, left and right, up and down, and then you can add a height and width dimension, which means that you can essentially turn a single cell reference into a range that spans multiple rows and columns, which is incredibly powerful. So the first example I show you here is, here's an offset. And in this offset, we have got a starting position in D18 in bright yellow, here start. And then we've got two position shifts that we're using. So we're using the rows and the columns. We're shifting down 3 rows, basically to here, and then right 3 columns, 1, 2, 3, and it ends here, which is why this cell returns here, end. So by using rows and columns, and if it's positive numbers, then you're going to move down rows, and if it's a positive number, you're going to move right in column shifts. If you put negative numbers in, you're going to move up rows, and if you move negative columns, it'll be left. But we're essentially moving 3 steps, 1, 2, 3, and 3 steps, 1, 2, 3. Simple enough, okay? But it does get a little bit more complex, and I might just jump to this example here, okay? So we've got a sum offset. So we're nesting offset within sum, and let's have a look at what we're doing here. In this instance, we're using all 4 of the parameters we have available: the row, the column, the width, and the height. We're starting, and you probably wouldn't do this in reality, but we're starting in this cell here. And let's have a look at what we've got. We've got a row offset of 3, a column offset of 2, a height of 3, and a width of 1. So what are we doing? In turn, we're going 3 rows down, 1, 2, 3, to this cell highlighted in red. We're shifting 2 columns, 1, 2, and then we're adding a height dimension. So how many rows in height are we going to expand this into as a range? 1, 2, 3, and the width is just 1. So it sticks with the single column that it's got. The end result is you have this as a range, which if you take the sum is 15,000, which is, I didn't mean to click that, which is exactly what we've got as the final result here. I suspect, and again, I've got to stop thinking of things to do on the fly, but I suspect if I took the sum off, oh, look at that, there we go, you would get the spill range of those 3 individual cells. I'm very happy that worked. So why might a best practice standard say you shouldn't use offset? Well, FAST is very, very strong on this idea that your modeling logic should be very clear and simple and easy to follow at all times. And to be honest, as you can probably sense from here, if I hadn't highlighted these cells, that's quite hard to track, you know, what's going on in the background. It makes it hard to audit. So that I think there's just an element of added risk if you really layer offset into your models all over the place, that it becomes very, very convoluted. Sorry, not convoluted. It just becomes a little bit difficult to unpick the logic for somebody other than you. And even for you, probably after a month. But here are a few applications of offset that I think are really useful. And the first one I'll show you is just, you know, let's take a few financial modeling examples. Let's say you have a 1 month or a 1 period delay between something where you've got the calculation of, say, the end of a tax year, where you've got an amount that you know you owe in tax as a company, and you know you're going to pay that tax in the following month. Well, you can use offset really nicely to say to kind of set up that delay. So here we're literally taking the current period value and we are delaying it by 1 month. How are we doing that? Well, we're shifting the reference one column to the left. So again, I followed best practice here. I'm referencing the input for the number of months delay, timesing it by -1 just to change the signage, and that shifts the number coming through to the following month. If I were to make this 2, you will see that the tax payment jumps to the following month. So essentially, the offset in this cell here is looking there, and then it's moving the reference 2 columns to the left. So that's pretty nice. Let me put that back to 1 before I forget. What else? Well, we could take that a little bit further. So maybe we could actually, we could do some of the dynamic tax calculations and then shift the payment using offset. Now, this is only semi-dynamic because in reality, what we would want to do is have a dynamic flag here, so that if I change the number of periods per tax submission to 4 or 2 or whatever it might be, then you'd want the flags to all update. But just bear with me on this. The offset here is essentially looking at this starting reference here, and now for the width, it is expanding the width of the range to 3 cells. So it's going to add up this cell, and this cell for the tax values and give us the total tax that's due every quarter. And then we're using offset again to shift the payment by 1 month. And then one of the most frequent uses that I had in financial modeling for offset, and certainly sum offset, I think sum offset's a great combination, is depreciation. So imagine, I think I just set this up because I only had a few columns that I wanted to use. Let's say you've got some CapEx that has a useful life of 6 months. We've got a 12-month timeline here. Well, we can use offset, sum and offset, to essentially create this very dynamic calculation that's always going to look back the number of months that you tell it to. So let's say it's a 6-month useful life. Then it's always going to be looking back 6 columns, the maximum of 6 columns that you've got available, and using that as the basis for a depreciation calculation. So what on earth do I mean by that? Well, let's take the depreciation calculation in month 2. Now, I've also nested a min in here, which is really important And I'm going to step back one level to explain that. If I didn't have the min, what you've got is a bit of a risk in the early periods of your model where you can see an error here, basically. So in that very first period, Offset is trying to move the column reference one column to the left, but there are no numbers in the column to the left. We are basically picking up this text string here, which we would never want. So I'm using min here to say, look, you either move back the number of columns that I'm telling you to, or you take the steps that I've got in the column counter and you take the min of those two. So it should never shift to a point where it's giving you an error. The pedantic amongst you might work out that it is actually kind of still looking at this column for the first period, but it doesn't return an error value because of the calculation that I've got going on. So that means that in period 2, and the assumption here is that we're taking the capex values from the end of the prior period. In period 2, it's only going to take the capex from period 1 and divide it by 6 because we've got a useful life of 6. In period 3, now we've got a range being summed for the capital expenditure, which comes to £36,000, let's call it in total. Divide that by 6, and you get 6,000 as the periodic depreciation, and so on and so forth. And you get to the point here where actually in period 6, what's it going to be doing? It's going to be looking at these 5 fields here, 84,000 capex spent in the last 5 periods in this case. Divide that by 6 and you get 14,000. So I think that's a really nice use case where you can set something up with a really nice dynamic range. If I were to change this, let's hope this works. Let's change it to 1 and see what happens. Okay, good. So this is probably a clearer example. Useful life now is just 1 month. So literally you've just got a 1 month shift of depreciation. If I move that to 2, then it's going to halve it. So again, period 2 is just looking at period 1's capex and dividing it by 2. Period 3 is going to add up the first 2 periods, 36,000, and give you half of that. It's quite hard to actually explain when you get into it in words, but I hope that's clear. The whole point for offset for me is that it's a very dynamic formula, and there's another layer to this where you can link some of the functionality from indirect to the functionality you've got with offset, where you could actually then be sort of referencing other parts of the model as the starting cell and then expanding whatever your calculation range is for offset to a number of cells, a number of rows, and a number of columns. Really cool function. Just have a look through the case studies that I've got here. I didn't put any exercises in for this one, but yeah, offset. Hope you like it.